This incident happened to my friend Jessie during winter season. She was married and also a working woman. Apart from this, she was a brave girl and never feared anything before this incident happened to her. This was something that she had never expected. Though she lost her life that day, I thought to share her experience with all of you, thinking that her story could help others learn something about her experience. So, let us start. Jessie was married about 2 years after her graduation, and her husband supported her, so he let her continue her job. Everything was going well when just before Christmas, her husband got some urgent work due, to which he had to go out of the country for a few days. Now she was alone at home, so she decided to return to her parents and celebrate Christmas with them. She booked her tickets and her flight was scheduled for 4:30 a.m. the next morning. She started packing up, but the main problem for her was reaching the airport before 4 in the morning. She knew someone who had a taxi and lived in her neighborhood, so she went to him and asked him to drop her at the airport before 4 a.m. the next morning. His name was Alexander, and he was in his late 40s. He agreed to take her to the airport, but he was charging extra money for taking her there. She didn't have any better choice, so she agreed with him and returned to her home. Alexander was also happy with their behavior of Jessie, but who can stop this from happening? Since Alexander had to come early at 3 a.m. and leave the airport with Jessie, instead of going to the parking lot, he parked the taxi near his home and started trying to sleep by extending the seats of the taxi. He was not in the mood to go anywhere else, and also he was getting enough for this trip, so he waited. He tried hard to get some sleep, but the mental problem did not let him rest. He had taken a huge loan amount from the bank for his wife's treatment, and now he had to pay the installments of the 3 weeks to the bank. He was worried about household expenses and bank installments. He was hoping for some miracle to happen to him, but his luck was not that strong. He thought for a long time, but couldn't think of anything. At last, Alexander made a plan of murder. While thinking a dangerous plan was formed in his mind, and he decided to execute it. He wanted to get rid of this troubles by robbing Jessie. He thought that Jessie is a resident of another city, and no one would even know. And also, she was economically a good target to be robbed. When Jessie booked him, his eyes went to Pooja's purse full of notes. While planning her murder, all these things came to his mind, and Jessie's purse was also waving in front of his eyes again and again. He fell asleep while planning in his mind. Even his sleep was broken when Jessie came to him with her belongings and asked her to keep them all inside the car. After placing the luggage in the taxi, Alexander took his water bottle and splashed it on his face to freshen up. When Jessie came, he took her in and went towards the airport. While driving to the airport, he was continuously thinking about his plan of murdering Jessie and robbing her. On the other hand, being tired of the office work and packing, Jessie couldn't sleep properly, due to which she fell asleep while sitting in the cab. Alexander was noticing all from the panel window, and seeing Jessie sleepy, the devil in his mind started taking a fierce form. Instead of taking her to the airport, he turned the taxi towards a deserted place. Jessie was completely unaware of all this. When Jessie woke up, she got scared seeing the silence around the cab. Before she could talk to Alexander after stopping the taxi, Alexander hit Jessie on the head with a jack rod, due to which she fell unconscious and her head started bleeding. After hitting her, Alexander took her purse and started looking for money inside. Jessie regained consciousness even before Alexander could run away with Jessie's belongings. Alexander caught her and put Jessie to death by adopting him with a knife kept for his safety. Later, he fled, leaving Jessie's dead body there. Screaming for her rescue, she got down from the cab and started running towards the road, but she could not run away from her death. He was relieved after robbing Jessie, but he was shocked when he did not find anything from Jessie's purse as expected. The problem from which he had committed such a big crime could not be fulfilled. He could not understand how or what to do. That's why Jessie's mobile became a ray of light for him. He sent a message from Jessie's mobile phone to her husband Daniel, giving her the account number to deposit the money. This became a noose around his neck. Daniel, being a highly educated and clever person, shared this information with the cops and took them with him in disguise when he went to meet Alexander. He never came in front of him, but when he kept the bag and left there, a strange guy came and took the bag. But before he could run away, the cops caught him and took him into custody. After detailed interrogation, he was produced before the court for final judgment, and since he had killed Jesse, he was sentenced to be hanged till death. After that, he was sent to jail in judicial custody. The police had already recovered the knife, jackrod, and taxi used in the murder at his instance. There was no fault from Jesse's side. Even then, that unique and kind girl lost her life just because of that cab driver's lust for money.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. When I was 25, I made the biggest decision of my life. I decided to move across the country to go to grad school. Life on the East Coast in Virginia hadn't been great since I finished undergrad. I was working 2 dead-end jobs and a toxic relationship, and just generally depressed going from 4 amazing years of college to that. I planned out that trip weeks before leaving. I decided to take the round going through the middle of the country, passing through states like Tennessee, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico. Since I didn't have any deadline on when I needed to arrive, I decided to drive 10 to 15 hours per day and stay wherever I ended up. I decided to find cheap Airbnb instead of pricey hotel rooms, but actually preferred a home feel of Airbnb ease to hotel rooms. My first day was the longest, driving 14 hours to Nashville. I got checked into my rental, got some barbecue, and fell asleep watching Breaking Bad. I hit the road early the next morning. The free feeling of driving cross-country is something I can't recommend enough to anyone. After driving for about 12 hours, I was feeling the stress of being behind the wheel for so long. I stopped for a coffee and to book my next day. I was an hour east of Oklahoma City, which had tons more options. But since I found myself nodding off, I figured it would be a safe bet to find something closer. As I scrolled through the app, I came across an entire cabin for $60 a night. The caption read, "Bob's Mountain Getaway." The cabinet itself looked simple. It had an aluminum sliding with a sheet metal roof. I wasn't looking for luxury since I was basically using the place to sleep. As I read through the description, something seemed off, as if the posters were trying too hard to make the place seem like a resort. I also thought to myself, this is eerily similar to those stories here about people getting murdered in a cabin in the woods. Having watched too many killer documentaries and movies, I decided to go ahead and drive to Oklahoma City and stay at a safer looking place. The rest of my trip was pretty normal. I'd never seen the mountains out west, so I was in awe with how rocky and how non-green it all was. Fast forward 2 years later, I'm out of grad school with a good job and a healthy relationship. I was listening to a true crime podcast called The Last Podcast on the Left. They had a segment where they read news stories about strange happenings. They read a news segment entitled The Eunuch Markers. Basically, these 2 men were renting a cabin on an LGBTQ app similar to Airbnb and offering services for gender reassignment surgeries. Mind you, these guys weren't doctors or even college educated. They were caught because one of the patients went to the ER due to a botched surgery. Curious, I Googled the story and started scrolling down, eventually to a picture of a cabin. It looked oddly familiar, and it took me a minute to realize why. It was the same cabin I saw on Airbnb 2 years back. I went through my phone to confirm because I remember taking a screenshot of it because of how creepy it looked. What makes things even more terrifying is that they were keeping the body parts after the surgeries in jars. They would grind them up to make sausages and other dishes. I'm not sure what sort of harm would have been felt me if I would have stayed there that night, but the thought of what was going on in the same place, I almost slept in the spine shelling. Take it from me. If you're ever in an area you're unsure about, always spend the extra money for your safety.
On July 28, 1977, Travis Victor Alexander was born in Riverside, California, the son of Gary and Pamela Alexander. Travis's early years were marred by tragedy. At age 11, an unstable and ultimately toxic home life meant that Travis would be forced to go and live with his paternal grandparents. And after his father's tragic death in mid-1997, he was followed by his 7 brothers and sisters. Despite his rough upbringing, Travis performed rather well in school, attending college and eventually getting a job with a company known as Prepaid Legal Services as a salesman, and later as the company's motivational speaker, a position that paid considerably better. As part of his job at PPL, Travis would often attend conferences that took place in Las Vegas, plying his trade as a motivational speaker in front of audiences of hundreds. During one such conference in September of 2006, there was one particular woman in the audience who was enraptured by Travis's charisma and his talent for public speaking. She approached him afterwards, introducing herself and striking up a conversation that would spark off a long-term friendship. This woman's name was Jodi Arias. Jodi Ann Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California, to a mother of European ancestry and a father of Mexican ancestry. After she met Travis at the PPL conference, the pair grew increasingly close, which led to Jodi converting to Mormonism just 2 months later, actually being baptized by Travis himself at a ceremony that took place in Southern California. Despite the distance between them, the pair then began dating a few months later, and Jodi even took the steps to move to Mesa and then Yreka, California, living in her grandparents' place so she could be closer to Travis. Travis and Jodi had a tumultuous, on and off again relationship for almost a year and a half, often forced to maintain a long-distance relationship due to the fact that one of them lived in Arizona, while the other had to remain in California for work. This kind of distance would put a strain on any relationship, but it appeared there were other factors at work that made Jodi and Travis's relationship less than healthy. From the very first time that Travis introduced Jodi to his close friends, they seemed to take an instant dislike to her. Jodi didn't seem in the least bit keen to impress or ingratiate herself to them, seeming generally disinterested in anyone but Travis. His friends detected a kind of jealousy to her, how she seemed to act overly possessive of Travis, yet at the same time didn't seem to show him much affection either. From the get-go, they found Jodi's behavior worrying, even frightening. Shortly after Jodi moved into her grandparents' home in Yreka, she and Travis arranged to accompany one another on a week-long work-related trip to Cancun, down in Mexico. The trip was scheduled for June 15th, and the couple intended to make something of a vacation out of it. However, not long after, Travis reportedly went to company HQ to request that his travel companion be changed to another member of the sales team. There has been much speculation regarding why exactly this is, but our best guess is to assume that it involved a breakdown in his and Jodi's relationship. Then on May 28th, Jodi called Travis in a state of distress. She told him there had been a burglary at her grandparents' place, where she was staying, and felt so unsafe that she begged to come and stay with him for a while. The burglars had apparently stolen a number of valuable items during the break-in, but perhaps the most significant was a .25 caliber Colt pistol which had belonged to her grandfather. Police had no luck finding the perpetrators, and eventually gave up looking altogether as they couldn't seem to find a single shred of evidence that might give them a clue to the identity of any of the people involved. In the face of Jodi begging to stay with him, Travis straight up refused. This is perhaps the best evidence we have that their pair had broken up by that point. If Travis loved her or had any feelings at all for her, surely he would have offered her a place to stay. Only he didn't. Or maybe it was the case that Travis did love her, but something else was stopping him from inviting her over. It's possible that there have been many another woman in Travis's life. However, it's also possible that Travis didn't invite Jodi over because he was afraid of her. Jodi called Travis yet again on June 2nd, repeatedly attempting to reach him between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., but her cell phone records show that, since the longest call was a mere 17 seconds, he apparently didn't pick up the phone. Then, just after 3 in the morning, Travis called Jodi back, and the pair engaged in a lengthy conversation. We have no idea what was said during the call, but we do know that at around 5:30 that same morning, Jody drove over to a car rental place over in Redding, California, entering the business shortly after it opened at 8 a.m. She told the clerk that she wished to use the car for the long drive to Utah for a work-related trip, and then drove it to visit a few friends on her way to Utah, where she would meet up with a fellow PPL employee by the name of Ryan Burns. Yet Jody didn't show up to meet Ryan until late in the evening on June 3rd, leaving a sizable amount of time to be accounted for that day. And when she did show up in the West Jordan suburb of Salt Lake City to meet up with Ryan Burns, her colleague noticed some unusual things about her. Firstly, he saw that her normally dyed blonde hair was now brown, but not its natural shade of brown, and that she seemed to have cuts or scratches all over her hands. Jody also refused to let him near the rental car, insisting that they take his car to the PPL business conference. Naturally, Ryan thought this behavior was unusual, but the pair had more important things to think about, as the conference would keep each of them occupied for the majority of the day. Ryan had another reason to keep quiet about such unusual behavior, and that's because he and Jody had begun something of a love affair during their time in Utah, with the two spending several hours hugging and kissing on a large beanbag chair at the place that they were staying. Jody also reassured him about the cuts on her hands by telling him that she had gotten them while working part-time at a Mexican restaurant in the Wairika area, an excuse that seemed good enough for him to quiet his suspicions. Once their business was adjourned, Jody departed from Salt Lake City on June the 6th, driving back westward towards California. Her cell phone records showed that she attempted to call Travis several times, leaving a handful of voicemails, yet she apparently also found a way to access this voicemail system. Why exactly she chose to do so is still a matter of conjecture, but we can all agree that it constitutes some rather unusual behavior. When she returned the rental car to the outlet in Redding, the clerk began to inspect the interior as a matter of routine. It is then that he too noticed something unusual. The vehicle was missing its floor mats on the driver and passenger side. There were also some kind of stains on the upholstery, as if some thick liquid had been spilled and then left to dry. However, since the upholstery was black and the color of said liquid was not visible, no suspicions were raised among the staff at the car rental outlet, and the interior was clean before it could be inspected by anyone of any importance. Meanwhile, a few days prior, Travis's employers had tried to contact him for a conference call, only to have their calls unanswered. The same pattern repeated itself for a few days, with friends and colleagues calling only for Travis to not pick up his phone. By June 9th, as a handful of Travis's friends were beginning to worry amongst themselves regarding his well-being, they agreed to go over to his home to check up on him. They spoke to a few of the other tenants who lived in the same building as Travis did, and found that they had not seen him in a few days. But since he traveled for work frequently, they didn't seem to think that there was anything to worry about. However, one of Travis's neighbors was in possession of a spare key to his apartment, which Travis has entrusted them with on the off chance he should ever lose his keys. The concerned group of friends proceeded to unlock the door to Travis's apartment, calling out his name as they entered. Then one of them froze with a sharp gasp, pointing to a pool of congealed blood that sat in the hallway in Travis's bedroom. In a panic, they began to search the apartment for him, eventually being greeted by the sight of his days-old corpse, which was lying in the bathtub, covered in blood. His friends cried and screamed as they called 911, but they did not attempt to revive him, as it was obvious from the state of his dead body that he had been deceased for a while. During the 911 call that followed the discovery, a police dispatcher asked if Travis had potentially thought about ending his own life, or if his friends knew of anyone who may have been threatening his life. His friends immediately mentioned Jody Arias, his ex-girlfriend, as a possible suspect in his murder. He said that, in the days prior to his death, Travis had mentioned that Jody had been stalking him, accusing him of seeing someone else, and seemed to be in some kind of jealous rage. This psychopathic jealousy had led her to begin attempting to access his Facebook account, and even going so far as slashing his car's tires. When investigating police arrived at Travis's home, they commenced an intense search for any evidence or clues as to the identity of his killer. One of the most curious things they discovered was a recently purchased digital camera in the washing machine. Despite a large amount of water damage, police were able to recover the camera's memory card and found on it a number of photographs which someone had apparently attempted to delete. These photographs showed Travis and Jody in numerous suggestive poses taken on the afternoon of June 4th. The final photograph in the series was taken at 5:39 p.m. that same day and showed Travis alive and well while he was taking a shower. In it, he was smiling playfully, completely naked, a candid depiction of the man's final moments. As another photograph, taken just minutes later, showed Travis bleeding profusely while lying on the bathroom floor. DNA samples were taken from bloody handprints found in the bathroom, which gave police all the evidence they needed to arrest a suspect, as they contained not only Travis's DNA, but Jody Arias's too. After being indicted for first-degree murder by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Jody was arrested at her home in California and then extradited to Arizona on September 5, 2008. Less than a week later, she pled not guilty, giving several different accounts of her alleged involvement in Travis's death. At first, she told investigating police officers that she was nowhere near Arizona on the day her ex-boyfriend was murdered. Then, after pressure from the cops, she admitted she was present at the time of his death, but that it had involved a home invasion, whereby two individuals broke into Travis's residence before killing him and attacking her in turn. 2 years of investigation later, Jody then changed her story entirely, telling the police that she had indeed killed Travis, but had only done so in self-defense. She spun a tale of brutal domestic violence, how she was a victim of a cruel and violent man, and how she regularly feared for her life around him. At her trial in February of 2013, Jody told the jury that she had been physically and emotionally abused by her parents, and that her life with Travis had echoed that same cycle of abuse and guardianship, one that she wanted to escape from, but couldn't quite bring herself to. She went on to describe the abusive type of life that Travis subjected her to, one that included a great deal of BDSM and other painful acts, most of which were in direct violation of the Mormon rules regarding such things. Jody also had recorded a phone conversation that she had with Travis, one that she used as evidence to prove that at one point Travis had wanted to use zip ties to tie her to a tree while she was dressed as Little Red Riding Hood. Jody is heard to respond enthusiastically on the phone, but told the court it was all an act, that the idea terrified her, and was typical of the kinds of things that Travis wanted to do. Jody also mentioned that Travis had admitted to find underage children attractive, basically painting him to be a complete monster. However, the prosecution argued that Jody was a vengeful, vindictive person who had only recorded the phone conversation in an attempt to blackmail Travis and embarrass him in front of his Mormon peers. The prosecution also questioned a forensic expert before the jury, prompting them to say that there had been a thorough examination of Travis's computer, one in which absolutely had no evidence of child pictures found, nor were there any references to anything intimate with children. Rebuttal witnesses from the prosecution also included several of Travis's other girlfriends, who stated he never exhibited any problems with anger or violence. Clinical psychologist Janine DeMarthe testified for the prosecution, stating that she found no evidence that Travis had ever abused Jody. DeMarthe also said that Jody suffered from borderline personality disorder, showing signs of immaturity and an unstable sense of identity. The final nail in Jody's legal coffin was the prosecution telling the jury that a single .25 caliber bullet casing was found near Travis's body, the same caliber of the gun that was stolen from her grandparents' place just a week before the murder. As it turns out, Jody had faked the entire burglary just to obtain the murder weapon, which not only showed that she was a dangerous psychopath, willing to hurt those close to her to achieve her goals, but that she had actually been planning to kill Travis for quite some time. After the trial, that had reportedly cost the U.S. taxpayer over $3 million, the jury found Jody guilty of first-degree murder, and she only narrowly avoided the death penalty when a judge essentially took pity on her mental illness, sentencing her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. She was also ordered to pay Travis's siblings over $30,000 in damages. As of 2016, Jodi is housed at Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville, and her case and trial have been the subject of a great deal of social media interest, with even Donald Trump commenting on what he called her obvious guilt. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the whole sordid drama is that Travis may well have genuinely believed that he had found the love of his life, and how in searching for the fairy tale romance that all people want deep down, he found the polar opposite, a living nightmare that would end in him losing his life to someone who could fairly be described as a conniving, violent, psychopathic predator. Relationships break down all the time, for a variety of reasons. People hurt, people cry, but most ultimately move on and find someone else. Jodi took that chance away from Travis in a horridly callous and bloody manner. Instead of letting Travis go, she dragged him down like a sinking ship, one which neither of them will ever emerge from intact.